Hey, how you doing today, folks? I know about a week ago I released a video and told you guys that I wanted to start doing a new series of videos. That way I could break up some of the plot leak discussion I was doing and some of my prediction videos and theory videos. I kind of wanted to start doing some other stuff to sprinkle in throughout the week. That way you guys had a few different things to listen to each and every week. And I gave you guys a few options of a few things I had in mind that I wanted to do, and most of you commented on that video and said that you'd like me to rewatch Game of Thrones and comment on all the old videos. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. Last night I watched Season 1, Episode 1, and I took some notes, so I kind of want to go over my thoughts as I rewatch the very first episode with you guys. But there's something I kind of want to do first, and I know some of you are probably going to hate me for doing this, but I want to give you a little backstory about how I became aware of the show and started watching the show. So that's what I'm going to do first, and then I'll just get right into the episode 1. When I finally decided to watch Game of Thrones, I had no idea what type of show I was actually getting myself into. And I don't think any of my friends were watching the show at the time, and if they were, I didn't know about it. I never saw any of them talking about it on Facebook or anything like that. And the name Game of Thrones was starting to pop up on my radar, but I didn't know what channel it was on or what it was even about. But I did hear it was a TV show, which is why I did wait so long to finally start watching it. I used to never be a fan of watching television shows, especially ones that were already into multiple seasons. Normally, once a show has already started and is several seasons into its story, I usually don't even bother picking it up and checking it out. But I kind of did that with Breaking Bad. After Breaking Bad had originally aired, about a year after that, I decided to finally watch that show, and I loved it so much. I kind of thought to myself, are there any other good shows out there that are as good as Breaking Bad? Because if there is, then I would love to check those out as well. So one day I posted on Facebook asking people, what other good shows were out there that was worth watching. And somebody that I went to school with said, you got to watch Game of Thrones, man. It's the greatest television show ever. And I kind of thought he was exaggerating, but I didn't dismiss it completely because he was the same person that told me about Breaking Bad. So I was kind of interested in it. So I asked him what Game of Thrones was actually about. And I kind of had a little idea myself, but I hadn't seen any photos from the show or even seen a trailer at that point. I was kind of like Jon Snow and knew nothing about the show. I didn't even know there were books until much later. But I assumed it had something to do with royalty because it did have thrones in the title, but that was it. But when he told me it was a fantasy show, that was damn near a death sentence for me because, believe it or not, I actually hate the fantasy genre. I've never been a fan of fantasy stories, even as a kid. I've never watched Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or anything like that, and probably never will, to be honest with you. So when he said it was fantasy, I kind of thought to myself, there's no way I'm going to be able to sit through that show, especially with hour-long episodes. So months actually went by since he said that, and I actually forgot about the show and didn't even plan on watching it. But I kept seeing him talk about the show on Facebook, so one night I just kind of said, screw it, there's nothing on TV, so let me actually give this show a fair chance and see if I actually like it. So I told myself, watch the very first 2 episodes. No playing on a phone or computers, actually give the show my undivided attention and watch at least the first 2 episodes all the way through without pausing it or getting distracted and see how I feel about the show after that. So I put the first episode in and pressed play, and in the opening scene, they showed the 3 Night's Watchmen, and I thought, okay, this kind of feels like a Braveheart almost. It kind of felt like it was set in a similar time period by the looks of their clothes, and they were on horseback, so it kind of felt like something familiar to me. And I remember as the 3 Night's Watchmen went through the tunnel of the wall and walked out into the woods were covered in snow, and they were on their horses, dressed in all black. And it kind of felt like there was a sense of danger in the air for some reason. And I thought, this seems like it could actually be pretty damn good, even if it is a fantasy show. And even though it was only the first 2 minutes of the show, I think I already knew I was going to like it, just by the way it was shot. And there was something about them wearing all black, riding through the white snow. Even though there was 3 of them, it felt like they were all alone. And it kind of felt as if something was about to happen that they weren't going to be able to defend themselves against. So I actually just kept watching and was pretty damn excited to see what was going to come. And when the member of the Night's Watch crawled up the little snowbank and saw all the bodies laying there dismembered, I thought, like, what the hell is this show? There must be some kind of savages out here that are even willing to kill children. Which is what reminded me of why HBO is so great. They're always willing to go places that other shows can't. And I certainly do not condone the killing of children, but I love when a show is willing to take it that far. But I actually had no idea what I was about to see that actually killed those people and that little girl. And normally, seeing a creature like this would make me stop watching it because it's usually corny or the CGI looks terrible or it feels way too unrealistic. But this actually didn't feel that way at all. When I first saw the others, it kind of gave me an adrenaline rush, as in, what the hell is this in the woods? What's this black figure that just stepped out from behind this tree and beheaded that man? How the hell did that little girl come back alive and have these piercing blue eyes? What the hell is going on here? Like, I was so confused. But after that first opening scene in the woods was over, I was all in. I had to find out what these things were in the woods. But then after that scene, we were actually introduced to the Stark family, which I instantly fell in love with. And you knew they had to be important, considering it was the family they introduced us to first. I also love the little details they made sure to include. When they show Winterfell for the first time, you can see the weirwood tree there too, something I didn't pick up on watching it the first time. It wasn't until later that I knew with this show you had to pay attention to every little thing because you never know what may be a clue for the future. But I was wondering who this guy was, the guy who is Jon Snow that I now know, and why the mother of the Stark children gave him this dirty look like that. I thought, what the hell? He's helping her son train, so why is she hating on him and giving him a dirty look like that? That was something I wasn't going to understand until a little bit later. But then we see the same guy from the opening scene, the member of the Night's Watch, and he is mumbling something about the White Walkers, which is actually a great name for the others beyond the wall in my opinion. Even to this day, hearing the term White Walkers, it still intrigues me. And as I rewatch this, I do notice something in this scene that reminds me of something that looks very similar to what we see later in the show. Look at this rock formation that surrounds where Ned does his beheadings. It reminds me of the ice formation where the Night's King has that ceremony with the baby, when he touches it on the cheek and turns it into the White Walker. They both have a similar rock formation with a centerpiece in the middle to where they do their ceremonies, basically, either turning the baby into the White Walker or doing their beheadings. It's a little different, but it kind of looks the same to me, which I think is pretty interesting. But after Ned beheads the man, that's when Bran asks his dad about the White Walkers. And it seems like Bran believed the man, and Ned seems actually kind of surprised that Bran would even question it. Honestly, after watching the first 10 minutes of the show, I assumed that the White Walkers were going to be a much bigger part of the story. I know they are important to the end story, but I originally thought we would see them a lot more. And I couldn't wait to see them again and find out more about them. I still feel that way. We still barely know anything about them. But after this, I really love this next scene when they find the direwolves. It wasn't until the second time I watched the show that I realized the foreshadowing here, with the stag and the wolf lying here dead after they fought it out. And now we know it was telling us that the Starks and the Baratheons were about to clash. And then Jon tells Ned that the kids must have the wolves because it's the sigil of his house. And Bran says, "What about you, Jon?" And Jon says, "I'm not a Stark." And I remember thinking, well, who the hell are you then? You sure seem like you were one of their brothers, but you just called the father Lord Stark instead of dad or father. So is he a member of the family or just one of Ned's men? It was pretty confusing at first. But then Jon finds Ghost. And that punk-ass Theon says it's the run of the litter. That one is yours, Snow. Pretty much giving a personal jab to Jon Snow. But after he said that to him, that was when I knew that Jon had to have been related to them but didn't share both of the same parents. And I think Theon had some nerve saying that to Jon, considering the circumstances that Theon's even with that family. I think Jon should have slapped him in his mouth for making that comment. But then we go to King's Landing, and that's when we get introduced to the Lannisters during some kind of funeral ceremony. And I had no idea who this man was laying here dead, but given how extravagant his showing was, I knew he had to have been someone pretty important. Then Jaime and Cersei have this very vague conversation that makes it seem like they had something to do with the murder, but I wasn't quite sure what they could have had to do with it. I never would have guessed it was because that they were brother and sister and having children together. This was one hell of an introduction, if you ask me. And I immediately didn't like this stuck-up privileged family, but Jaime's character actually did start to grow on me as the show progressed. And I know I should hate him because of the things that he has done, but I actually enjoy what he brings to the show. But then we quickly jump back to Winterfell, and Ned gets the news that Jon Arryn is dead, which was the man that we just saw. And Catelyn says a fever took him. But then you think about the conversation Jaime and Cersei just had, so you had to think there had to be something more to it than just that. Then Catelyn starts to prepare the dining hall for the arrival of the king. And she says Lord Tyrion needs plenty of candles for his chamber, because she is told he reads all night. But we know what Tyrion does. He be knocking boots all night, putting his father's coin to good use. But then we see Bran climbing around, jumping around on all the rooftops. And it's kind of a shame what happens to Bran. Watching him climb the buildings like he does reminds me of the video game Assassin's Creed. Watching this, you think Bran could have been a damn ninja. It's kind of unfortunate what actually happens to him a little bit later in this episode. But then the king and all of his men arrive, and his son Joffrey comes prancing in on his horse, looking like a douchebag. And it's obvious Sansa is immediately interested in him, which is pretty unfortunate for her. I also love the Hound's introduction here. He was decked out in armor, wearing a helmet that covered his entire face. It kind of reminded me of the movie Gladiator for some reason, and I knew whoever this guy was with the burnt face had to be some kind of a badass. But I remember watching this scene and being kind of nervous when the king got off his horse and approached Ned the way he did. I was all in with the Starks at this point, and I thought, the king's going to end up treating him like shit, isn't he? The scene was pretty tense, as if the king was here and he meant business. But Ned and Robert exchanged a few insults, then laughed it off and hugged. So I thought, thank God Ned and the king are actually tight. It actually seems like they're pretty close friends. But they don't even allow Jon to meet the king in this scene. You think with as many bastards as Robert has, you'd think they wouldn't have to hide Jon like that. I don't think Robert would give a damn. Him and Ned are boys. But then Ned takes him down to the crypts, and Robert names him Hand of the King. And we found out Robert was in love with Ned's sister. So they must go way back. But they didn't stay in the crypts for long, and it still has me wondering to this day what's all down there. But now we get introduced to Tyrion Lannister, my man, one of my favorite characters, who has arguably the best dialogue on the show. And watching these scenes with Tyrion, you see how much fun he was having in the early days, before all the doom and gloom blanketed Westeros. His scenes were just so much more enjoyable to watch. He was so much happier and was able to laugh before his world got flipped upside down much later on in the show. But we go back to the crypts, and Robert is visibly still mourning the death of Lyanna. And that's when we first hear the mention of the Targaryens. And at this point, I was completely lost the first time watching this. There were so many characters to try and remember, and none of them were throwaway characters. This was shit that you had to learn if you wanted to keep up with the show. And that's when we get introduced to Daenerys and her brother. And I'm not even going to mention her brother's name. I hated him, and this part of the story completely threw me off. It almost felt like a completely different show, a show I didn't like. It actually took a long time for me to be able to tolerate some of Daenerys' scenes. I look forward to the day that her brother actually died. And we also see another foreshadowing scene here, when Dany gets in the steaming hot bath. We would later learn the water could have been on fire and it still wouldn't have bothered Daenerys. And I also got to be honest with you, I didn't like the Dothraki at first either. They spoke a different language, they looked so much different than the main characters. It felt like this was a completely different show at this point. But Khal Drogo eventually grew on me, and now I still kind of wish he was here. I actually wanted to see him cross the sea. I was wondering what kind of damage he could do if he actually made it to Westeros and fought Robert for the throne. I was really looking forward to that. But we go back to Winterfell when the Starks and Lannisters are feasting together. And Cersei looks very miserable, as if she's in the slums and the Starks are just some peasants to her. And Jon is outside, pissed off at the world for raising him as an unwelcome bastard. But Uncle Benjen shows up and tells Jon he's always welcome at the Wall, which Jon was very eager to do. Anything to get him away from these people, and Catelyn Stark especially, who always makes him feel like shit. And next is one of my favorite scenes from the episode. Jon and Tyrion meet and trade a few insults. But Tyrion actually gives Jon some advice. And I think Jon realizes at this point that him and Tyrion might actually have more in common than he thought. And then Tyrion then says, all dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes. And Jon kind of looks at him like, you may be right. And once again, I hear the famous phrase, winter is coming. And I wonder, why do people keep saying that? Is it going to snow? Who cares? Like, I had no idea their winters lasted for years and years and pretty much brought hell on earth to these people. And another one of my favorite scenes in this episode is the next one, where Jaime and Ned trade a few words. Basically, Jaime wants Ned to fight him in a tournament. But Ned doesn't play fight, he fights for real. And he lets Jaime know, I might be an older man, but I will still kick your ass. Which I loved. And you can tell Jaime and Ned are not going to be getting along. Ned has no interest in going to King's Landing, but he's an honorable man and doesn't want to disobey Robert when he knows he needs him the most. And then that's when we see the Stark's Maester deliver Catelyn and Ned a letter from Catelyn's sister in the Eyrie, stating that Jon Arryn, who was Robert's hand, did not die of a fever, but he was in fact murdered by the Lannisters, and the king is in danger as well. But Ned said, your sister's batshit crazy. Her husband just died. She doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. Ned also knows his boy Robert is married into the Lannister family, and he doesn't want to jump to any conclusions and start a war over this. But Catelyn believes her sister and continues to talk about it, and that's when Ned actually starts to question it himself. And he now knows he's going to have to find out what is exactly going on. But then we go back to Pentos, where Dany's brother just sold her off to the Dothraki in exchange for access to their army, so that he can use one day to take back the throne that he feels is his. The throne that is Robert Baratheon's, and the one that he is currently sitting on, and isn't going to be giving up to no damn Targaryen without a fight. And that's when we're introduced next to Jorah Mormont, who is not Dothraki, but he speaks English, and I must say I was pretty happy to see someone else in this part of the world speaking English. And there's something I noticed in this scene as well. If you look at Jorah's clothes here, they look very similar to what he is wearing in the Season 7 leaked photos when he meets up with Daenerys again. So that's kind of interesting and something to keep in mind. But Dany is given a gift of 3 dragon eggs that are said to be stone now, and nothing more than just a decoration. And boy, were they wrong. And that's when Daenerys and Khal Drogo then head off to consummate their marriage, which Dany wants no part of. But Khal Drogo wants what is now his, and he's not going to take no for an answer. So it seems like Daenerys is now in a miserable situation thanks to her brother's hunger for power. And it's pretty much known that he will sacrifice his sister in any way to get that power. He's basically a piece of shit who needs to die. So, back at Winterfell, it's confirmed that Ned is going to be Robert's hand to the king. And Ned is going to have to travel to King's Landing with Robert to do so. But Robert is thankful for it because he knows Ned is pretty much the only person he can trust at this point. And that's when we see Bran climbing the walls once again. And who does he see? Jaime and Cersei having sex. Yup, brother and sister having sex. The king's wife and the king's guard. Getting it on. And I think Cersei is pretty damn shocked to see him all the way up there in the window. And Jaime knows if word gets out about this, they both could be killed. And feeling like he couldn't trust Bran to keep it a secret, he pushes him out the window and Bran presumably falls to his death. And that's when the episode ends. So this episode actually starts with a children's death and presumably ends with a child's death. So you can tell this show is willing to take things to any limit. And it definitely set the tone for what's to come. And with that, I was all in with this show. The first episode, I'd probably give it 10 out of 10. I completely loved it the first time I saw it. And even after seeing this episode several times, I still like it just as much as the first. This was a great way to set up the show and all of its characters. It gave us that good introduction to the White Walkers, but didn't reveal too much, so it still kind of left us hungry for more. I really loved this episode. So comment below and tell me your guys' initial thoughts on all this stuff. What was your first impression of everyone? And what made you guys start watching the show? Was you as stubborn as I was with fantasy stories? Thanks for listening, guys, and keep your eyes open for my discussion of episode 2. Bye. So with you guys. But there's something I kind of want to do first, and I know some of you are probably going to hate me for doing this, but I want to give you a little backstory about how I became aware of the show and started watching the show. So that's what I'm going to do first, and then I'll just get right into the episode 1. When I finally decided to watch Game of Thrones, I had no idea what type of show I was actually getting myself into. That were already into multiple seasons. Normally, once a show has already started and is several seasons into its story, I usually don't even bother picking it up and checking it out. But I kind of did that with Breaking Bad. After Breaking Bad had originally aired, about a year after that, I decided to finally watch that show, and I loved it so much. I kind of thought to myself, are there any other good shows out there that are as good as Breaking Bad? Because if there is, then I would love to check. And I don't think any of my friends were watching the show at the time, and if they were, I didn't know about it. I never saw any of them talking about it on Facebook or anything like that. And the name Game of Thrones was starting to pop up on my radar, but I didn't know what channel it was on or what it was even about. But I did hear it was a TV show, which is why I did wait so long to finally start watching it. I used to never be a fan of watching television shows, especially one. Hey, how you doing today, folks? I know about a week ago I released a video and told you guys that I wanted to start doing a new series of videos. That way I could break up some of the plot leak discussion I was doing and some of my prediction videos and theory videos. I kind of wanted to start doing some other stuff to sprinkle in throughout the week. That way you guys had a few different things to listen to each and every week. And I gave you guys a few options of a few things I had in mind that I wanted to do, and most of you commented on that video and said that you'd like me to rewatch Game of Thrones and comment on all the old videos. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. Last night I watched Season 1, Episode 1, and I took some notes, so I kind of want to go over my thoughts as I rewatch the very first episode.